Hello, everybody. I am so sorry that I am standing between you and lunch. I didn't notice. So I'll try to make it a little bit quicker, but that doesn't bring the lunch sooner. So anyway, uh, as it was said, my name is Miro. My full name is Miro Hrončok. I work at Red Hat. It's not going to be in those things. My English is getting worse. Sorry about that. I work for Red Hat Czech, and I also work for Faculty of Information Technology of Czech Technical University in Prague, where we happen to teach a bit of Python to some of our students. One thing we teach them is that every time you write some code, you should always write tests, because that's how you're supposed to do it, and that's how we love it, and that's how really we want our students to do it as well. And one of the tasks the students were creating was written in Python Twitter wall for terminal. We all love textual interfaces, so I have some demo here. Let's just run this. It's a Twitter wall console version, and I'm querying it for PyCon.cz. And there are some tweets with PyCon.cz hashtag, and if some new tweets will happen in some time, they will appear down below this. It was very easy task. You just use requests to write it. I'm going to sit down to show you a little bit of the code so you can understand what's going on. OK, it's just you have to Control-C it. So I have PyTwitter module with Twitter Py. There is a class called Twitter wall. If you initialize it, it takes some basic stuff like API key and API secret. It creates a session, or requests some authentication through OAuth2. And most importantly, it searches for tweets. So there is a very important method that's called tweets, and if you give it a query like PyCon.cz and then count number of tweets you want to get, it will simply use Twitter API to fetch those tweets for you. You don't really need to read the code and try to understand it, but it's important that this tweets method does something important for us. And I want to test this, and I want to write some tests. So I pre-wrote some tests. What's going on? Nothing? OK, sorry. So I have twitter.py, and this is a very naive way of testing. So I import PyTest. If you don't use PyTest, you should. And I import my Twitter wall. I happen to have the authentication file in my working directory. It's not in the project itself. It contains sensitive data, and it allows me to query Twitter API. And I will just get the key and secret from the file and use it. I'm using a PyTest fixture. For those of you who don't know what that is, basically for each test, the last thing here is a test, I can give it a client, and the client is a fixture that's being constructed with Twitter wall key and secret. And I will search, get a tweets for PyCon.cz, and I will only get one. I will test that the length of return tweets is 1, because I want it to be 1. And I will load the first tweet, and I will check that that the user from Twitter of that tweet is PyCon.cz. Because last time when I checked, that was correct. So I'm going to use PyTest for this, and I'm going to explicitly run this one file and see what happens. The test failed because Petr Hodač tweeted something and ruined my entire presentation. And now what are we supposed to do? Let's just fix the test, right? I'm just going to go here, and I'm going to fix the test. And hopefully, oh, Thank you. I was kind of expecting this to happen, and it did. And so the thing I'm trying to test, it's kind of moving, it's changing. And I can do stuff. I can say, OK, I can never know what the user will be, so I will not test for the user. I will only test for the things that are stable, that are always the same. So I can maybe get a tweet text and test if PyCon hashtag is inside the text, because it wouldn't be there in the search result if it weren't there. But it limits me. It limits me because I cannot always fix my test by changing the username. That does not scale very much. Of course, I could do crazy stuff. Let's say I will not search for PyCon CZ because it's happening right now and the tweets are very fast. I will search for something that happened 2 years ago, and I will hope that nobody is using that hashtag anymore. But that's not going to fix my test anyway, because first of you who will see it will tweet it just to break my test, which is awesome. It means you're paying attention. So how can I solve this problem and more problems? There are more problems. First of all, I have this authentication file with my secret and key for my Twitter account. And when I publish this code on GitHub, of course, without those credentials, otherwise I would be pretty dumb. Then if you want to run my test, you need your own credentials. And if you plan to use my software, you might have those credentials. But if you don't want to use it, if you just want to test it for some purpose, maybe you're packaging it for Fedora, or maybe you are running your Python package index continuous integration and you are running all the tests for all the packages or whatever, then you need to create the authentication file with the key and secret. You need to go to whatever Twitter.com something and obtain the key and secret. And it's not very useful. And it's very hard to do so. So it would be much better if I can write a test in a manner that no API keys are really needed. And of course, there are, or I thought of 3 ways how to do this. And the first way, it's pretty easy idea. Let's just create a fake Twitter server and run it when I run the tests and test everything, not for twitter.com, but for localhost. And I will have my own Twitter API. So I created something a little bit like that. I included it in the package because it might be useful for anything else. It's not Twitter, it's Schwindler. It's very simple code. I didn't use any framework for it, not to bring any dependencies. So I have a serve for everything that creates a TCP server with my Schwindler handler, and it serves forever. It's very easy. And my this bind socket stuff, that's just a boilerplate. This is my server. So if you do a get, because we are going to do get, if you search, you're doing get. Then everything will be always OK. Everything will be always JSON. It will have some data. We don't know yet what data. And it will dump the data. So for now, we want to search tweets. And I happen to know that we need statuses. If I do a typo, that's obvious, but I will not notice it. Just shout that I'm doing a typo. Thank you. So there are statuses, and that's a list. And each of this list is, of course, another dictionary. And it has some text, which can be whatever. PyCon CZ is cool. And it has something else. It has, what are we checking? We are checking the user, right? So it has a user. And the user, unfortunately, is another dict. And it has a screen name. And that's going to be always Petr Hodač for now. If I didn't do any typo, we have statuses. We have one status. It has its text. And it has a user that has a screen name. And that's Petr Hodač. One more thing we need to do is to have a post method defined. Because if I look back to the implementation, if I find it, there's a very bad, crazy create session thingy here that posts some key to Twitter and obtains a token, which happens to be an access token, and it's very easy, but we need it. So I'm gonna, when I do a post, the server, the fake Schwindler server, will always return access token, and the token doesn't really matter, so it's gonna be XXX. And if I write everything correctly, now our server should work. What I need is, of course, adjust the test, and not run it, sorry. This is still running. I'm just gonna type it again. Nano tests test twitter.py. And here in the client section, I will say that the URL is http localhost 8080. Now I am running the API client against my own thingy, and I need to, of course, I need to run the server. Normally I would put it in the test itself, but for making things easier, I would just do it here in a second session, a second terminal open. And I will do Python m by twitterwall dot Schwindler. I cannot spell it. How do I spell it? Schwindler. Okay. Schwindler. This should wait. It runs the server, and now I can run the tests. And oops, there's a key error. Why? There's an ID thing. My implementation inside uses ID, which I forgot on purpose when I created this test, this Schwindler server. So I will edit it. So we need an ID. So let's just put it here. ID is 666, whatever is the number. And now I need to restart this, run it again, run the test. My tests are passing. So this is the first thing how we can do this. The problem here is obvious. I now have just one test. When I create 40 different tests, then the server code will get much more complicated. Also, if I happen to send invalid credentials in my code, this test will not uncover the problem because it always replies correctly. If I want, I could make the server more complicated to behave like normal Twitter, but at the end, all I had in the beginning was a simple Twitter wall, and at the end, I need to re-implement Twitter, which is crazy. You don't want to do that. So there's another thing you can do. You can use mocking. There was supposed to be a talk by Slavek, don't use mock, use flex mock. I wanted to say we're going to use flex mock as well because you saw the talk, but you didn't. I'm going to use it anyway. So I have this other test, and it's test, whatever was this, Twitter mock, yeah, exactly. So here, it's very easy. When I create the client, I am mocking request session, which is used internally, and I am saying that the post method, because I am using post, will be this HTTP fake that will return access token. And the HTTP fake is up above. It creates a function that returns, again, flexmock. That's in this case, that's a fake object. And the fake object mimics the request response. It has a status code, 200, and it has lambda JSON the data, because JSON is the method that returns the parse data. Also, when I search tweets, I do the same thing, but this time I'm mocking the get method. We already know it's not going to work, so I'm already going to fix it and putting ID here. And again, we have some text, we have some ID, and we have some user. And it all looks quite fine. So let's just run it and see what happens. So pytest Twitter mock. Oh, again, on-purpose failure. So mock class object has no attribute raise for status. The mock class object is the fake object, the response I created. It's mock class because it's fake. And raise for status is something in requests that I happen to use in the code. And I need my objects to have it. So I'm just going to add it here. And it's raise for status. And it's going to be lambda none. Just like that. And by the way, I can shut down the Schwindler server. I'm not using it anymore. And I'm running the test. And the test is passing. And it's excellent. The problem here again is, once I happen to use something else in the implementation inside, I will have to edit my fakes and make them more complicated. And if I happen to have 40 different tests, 40 different use cases, my fakes are going to get more and more complicated. But this is still a very good thing to do, mocking requests to test your API clients. The third option, and I happen to like it the most, but you can have your own opinion. I am not saying it's the best always, is using betamax. Betamax is, if you happen to know what used to be like a VHS cassettes, there used to be betamax and it failed, but there are cassettes for video. And in this case, it's a Python library that helps you with testing things that are moving, in this case, testing clients for web APIs that change the content. It works like this. First time HTTP communication happens, it's going to be recorded. And every other time, instead of doing the actual communication, you're just going to play the cassette, thus rerunning the communication without it actually happening. So it's very easy, and it's very easy to use it in a PyTest as well. So I have betamax py, and I didn't want to run it. What did I do? I switched to the second terminal. Not that bad. So what I did here is, only thing I used is I used betamax session in here. That's a fixture, and I am giving the session to my client. My client happens to accept the session. It originally didn't, so I had to change the client code. But it was fairly easy. Here in the init, I added session, and when I create the session, normally I create a new request session, but in this case, if session is provided, I use the one that was provided, and if no session was provided, I just create a new one. That allows me to do dependency injection and inject my session from the tests. And this is it. Now I have the tests, and I can run it, and it passes because I created the cassettes before. So I'm going to remove the cassette and run the test again. PyTest betamax. My test is failing because in this file I expected to have this user, and Yona again broke my tests. So now if I edit it, I will edit it only once. So it's Yona Tony. So I'm going to go here. I'm editing it and running the test. And the test will always pass because it's not doing any actual HTTP communication anymore. It's just rerunning the stuff that's saved on the disk. The file is in JSON. It serializes the request and the response, and it's loaded every time the test is running again. It's supposed to go to Git, and everyone who clones the project can run the test without actual internet connection, without the credentials. It has some downsides, of course. My credentials are recorded in the cassettes. So I don't want to push them to Git right away, because then somebody could use them to do me some harm, tweet naked pictures on my behalf or whatever. and then that would be against code of conduct here, and I would have troubles. So there are ways how you can hide your credentials in the cassettes and still make it work. I have like 9 minutes left. Okay, so I will show you a little bit about it. I happen to have a Python file that explains it, but I forgot how I named it. And it's definitely not here. That's weird. So let's just see if I didn't put it in test. Test hide. Oh, it's in test. So test hide. It's not a full working example. It's just how you're supposed to do it. So normally, if you run your tests, you normally don't happen to have this environment variable from bash out file. So if you don't have it, which is the normal case for everybody, because they don't know they are supposed to have it, then you set a token, which is in this case something you use as a credential, to some false value, some XXX false token. It doesn't really matter. And you also configurize betamax, or this entire with block is a thing that you use to configure betamax. It's no special magic. It's just the way how you do it. And I will say the default record mode is none. So I previously said that the first time you run a HTTP communication, it's going to get recorded, and every other time it's going to get played. That's just the default behavior. That's the record mode called once, just for the first time. There are more record modes. One of them is obviously none. And in this case, it will never attempt to do any actual HTTP communication or record it. It will just play your cassettes, and when the cassettes are not there, it will fail. On the other hand, there is another mode that's called all, and this will always re-record the cassettes, whether they are there or not. In this case, if we provide out file variable on bash to the test, we can open the file, parse our credentials. There is an excellent non-existent myout parsing function. Get a token, and when we are doing it, we will always re-record the cassettes because we have the credentials and we hope that everything is fine. Of course, in this case, this will not solve the problem that the user is changing, but this is just an example. And the final thing we do is that we define cassette placeholder, and we say every time there's a value of token somewhere recorded in the cassette, please replace it with this string. So now if you record the cassettes and you open them and you look at the JSON, there are no secret credentials. There's just string saying token. And when the cassettes are replayed, it gets replaced the other way around. So it's all very nice, and it works very well, except when I use Twitter API, I have my API key and API secret, and I do stuff with it, like base64 it or whatever. Then I post it to Twitter, and I get some token back. And I don't know yet what the token will look like. So I cannot just create a placeholder for it, right? Actually, the author of betamax already thought about this, and you can create a function that hooks on creating a cassette or playing a cassette. And when you do so in that function, you can open the response or the request, parse the header, find the actual thing, the token or whatever it is, and define a placeholder from that function. I'm not going to show it in here. It's all in the documentation. If you are interested in betamax, you can search Python betamax on Google. If you search only betamax, you will find other things. For example, the Ruby thing, which was first, and betamax for Python is just a re-implementation of betamax for Ruby. If you want to know something more about flexmog, you can Google Python flexmog. Otherwise, you will find the Ruby implementation of flexmog. The Ruby guys, they do some nice things sometimes, except for the syntax. I think I have like 4 minutes left, and I said already everything I wanted to say. So if you have any more questions, I suppose you should do them on Slido. Yeah. Lumir can tell you more about it. I have no idea.
Yeah. If you have any question, let's put it on Slido. We have last chat. Last few seconds. And counting.
Nobody's interested in anything.
Yeah.
Or there is a moderator who is sleeping and they are asking questions and nobody can see them.
I don't think so. I can check it.
You can always
give me
ask verbally, but we are supposed to prefer this.
I don't have connection.
So if you don't have connection, then you probably has to ask normally.
Yeah.
But I would like you to use the mic.
Do you want to ask something? Okay.
It's a very useful thing. You can ask your question and drop mic.
Is there a library like betamax for file system or database access?
I really don't know. I suppose if it is, you will be able to find it. If it's not, you can always use flexmock to mock around the file system. And if it's get too complicated, you can then take it out of your project and create such library. This is what I think is the way Betamax originally started. Somebody was mocking his request too much and said, why am I doing this all over again in each of my project? Just create a library. But that's just what I think. That's not a real story.
Okay, another question for people without connection? Okay.
If we need the mic, we need the mic. It's not, we don't hear it here, it's just for the recording.
Are quite good. My question is, so do you have, when you use Betamax, do you have to run your tests once to see them, for example, fail at least once to record the cassette? Is there a way to make it record the cassette beforehand and then you run the test? So kind of like...
The easiest way how to record the cassette is to run the test. And if you happen not to have the test yet, you can have a partial test. Like you just do the get, or you just do the search, or you just do the tweets call, and you don't assert anything at all, and it gets recorded, and then you can finish on your test. I can now go to the test and completely rewrite it, and if it does the same HTTP request, it will still be recorded. If you use the fixture for PyTest, the cassettes are called on the file system based on the name of the test. So until you rename the test, it will still work. You can always manually create the cassette if you happen to need so, but it would be tedious.
Okay, another one?
I think they are hungry.
No, yeah, sure, definitely. Nothing on Slido, so applause for Miro.